Andi Christman has worked for the county since 2018 and is the program manager of the Alachua County Conservation and Management Program, which includes managing the Alachua County Forever program. She leads both the county's conservation land acquisition program and the stewardship of over 22 county preserves. Andi has worked in the management of public conservation lands in Florida since 1994. She spent 14 years with the Florida Forest Service, first as the ecologist at the Withlacoochee State Forest, then as the invasive plant specialist in the State Forest Health Office. She spent 9 years with the Florida Park Service as the biologist at Paynes Prairie Preserve State Park. Andi holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Resource Ecology and Management from the University of Michigan and a Master of Science degree from the University of Florida School of Forest Resources and Conservation. Andi is a Florida Certified Prescribed Fire Manager and a Certified Public Manager. Andi enjoys exploring nature, especially hiking and paddling. She has completed through hikes of both the 2,190-mile Appalachian Trail and the 2,650-mile Pacific Crest Trail, immersing herself in the mountains and ecosystems of the east and west coast for each hike. Welcome, Andi.
Thank you, Mark.
I think I know what it means. That means you did those hikes without taking breaks in between. Some people do a week here and a week there. You did them straight through.
Yeah, start to finish.
I want to know more about that, but let's jump into the conservation work you do first.
Great.
You know, the Alachua County Forever program is an iconic kind of program and symbol in Alachua County of how much this community cares. You know, I guess we're at 4 times now voters have voluntarily decided to tax themselves for this. So tell us about the Alachua County program, the Alachua County Forever program, how it was created, a little bit of the history of it.
Yeah, gladly. The Alachua County Forever program truly is an example of the will of the citizens being made into a reality. The program was the brainchild of county leaders and focused local citizens to expand the network of protected lands and habitat within Alachua County. That effort really began in the mid-1990s and the late 1990s, and it coalesced with the citizens and voters of Alachua County passing the Alachua County Forever Bond referendum in the November 2000 election.
I remember those days so well, and I remember Robert Hutchinson and Doug Hornback and Pageen Hanrahan and Doris Barden, and so many people have been involved in that and the future issues of the tax. Kristen Young, Tom Kay. I know I'm missing people, but it was an extraordinary group of folks. But please continue.
Yes, absolutely. Not only those county leaders and visionaries, but also the leaders within the county commission and the local municipalities all work together to create what is actually a nationally recognized successful public land conservation program at the county level. From the passage of that bond referendum in 2000, the program has gone on to be represented to the citizens 3 additional times through the Wild Spaces and Public Places surtax referenda, and each of those have passed, including most recently in November of 2022, which authorized an additional 10 years of support for this program to continue. What the program does is, using assessments that have been completed in the county, it works to protect the most environmentally significant lands in the county for future generations. Some of those lands are wetland areas, some of them are upland areas. They are strung together in a network that throughout the county makes corridors for wildlife movement and protects water resources for both natural wild citizens of Alachua County, but also, most importantly, the human citizens of Alachua County.
How many acres since its inception have we protected with the program?
In that 23 years, the county has acquired 33,000 386 acres.
Wow.
So that's a significant footprint. That's not, all of those acres aren't connected, but many of them are connected to the two largest county preserves that are acquired within that system are each about 6,000 acres in size.
Wow.
But the program also buys strategically critical pieces that connect existing public conservation lands. For example, maybe connecting Paynes Prairie Preserve State Park with the wildlife management areas around the Alachua area to make what's most valuable in the end for wildlife, which is corridors.
It seems like such a strategic process. I mean, even if you're buying a property that is not directly connected, you've got an eye to the future and how to kind of put those building blocks in place.
Yes, we are working with assessments of the county that were done in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and even now most recently in the 2020s, and building all of those priorities and looking at how the landscape of conservation has changed on the ground to ensure that our acquisition priorities in terms of meeting the program goals, protecting water resources, protecting wildlife habitat, and providing resource-based recreation for the citizens of the county, we're ensuring that those goals stay current and up to date as the landscape of the county changes.
Before we leave Alachua County Forever, the original, there have been some changes over time. The original issue was based on a $250,000 property tax for a 20-year program. I know Todd Hutchinson in the clerk's office and Tommy Crosby are very happy that we, due to the favorable interest rates that kind of materialized in this period, that we were able to pay those bonds off, I think 4 years early in 2016. But the Wild Spaces Public Places, the 3 additional kind of renewals of Alachua County Forever, are based on a sales tax. This most recent one is about it's a 10-year program, and it's based on 80% of a half penny, the other 20% going to parks and recreation. Tell me a little bit about who we partner with, because I know we have our program, but we are also able to leverage it and partner, and tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. Partnerships are key to the success of our program and really all land conservation programs in Florida and in the nation. Locally, our strongest partners include Alachua Conservation Trust. In fact, they provide our land acquisition negotiator, which is a staff position that works to negotiate with the local landowners when we're moving towards a contract on a given piece of property. They also provide support in terms of grant applications, because we are constantly looking to leverage those citizen tax dollars to make them go as far as they possibly can. So Alachua Conservation Trust will apply for regional grants that include reimbursements for land acquisitions that the county does using the county surtax dollars. Over the program's history, we have utilized approximately $41 million of partnership funding in our land acquisitions. We've spent approximately $81 million. So you can see that's almost a 1/3 ratio of partnership funding in the form of grants that have been received, donations from individual landowners, because we do sometimes receive full donations or donations of a part of the value of a property that we're working to buy. And then additionally, we receive funding support when we particularly are pursuing conservation easements. The federal government has some very, very successful and useful funding opportunities for landowners that wish to protect their land through an easement.
Since you brought up conservation easements, I know that that's been a real focus of late. And for those who don't know, what is a conservation easement?
A conservation easement is a method to protect a property into the future while the landowner retains ownership of the underlying fee or underlying ownership of the land. And typically what that means is that the landowner works with the buyer, in this case the county, to determine values that the landowner is willing to sell, and often those values translate to the development rights. So a landowner, particularly an agricultural landowner, might retain the right to continue farming or doing the practices that they and their family perhaps have always done on that property, but sell the development rights so that the property can never be subdivided or cleared or paved or turned into another use other than the agricultural use that currently exists.
And that's in perpetuity?
It is in perpetuity. A deed is written that defines what's allowable on the property and what's prohibited on the property under that conservation easement. The landowner signs off on that as part of the negotiations, and they receive a significant amount of financial funding through the sale of that conservation easement, and then the land is protected from change in the future.
I know the saying that I hear frequently when it comes to how important it is to protect these agricultural pieces of land is that, it seems like in many times the last crop a farmer grows is houses, and this is a way to preserve really an essential part of green space and wildlife corridors and all of those things.
As well as local food production.
Yeah.
Yes, and for many farmers, those folks who have devoted their life and their focus to farming land to produce a crop, they have a legacy and a history and a connection to those lands that they want to maintain. But it is hard. It's very challenging for farmers to keep farming in the current environment. I think getting increasingly challenging for many. And so this is a method for us to help utilize protection of these conservation easement properties to fill in those corridors and networks of protected land that still have value for wildlife, still have value for water resource protection, but enable us to maintain those agricultural commodity production opportunities in the county and enable those farmers to continue to live that legacy on their land.
I see. We've talked about wildlife corridors a couple of times, and I know recently I saw a map that kind of highlighted the greenways or the green chunks of land throughout the state. So is that something that you really kind of keep an eye on and you participate with others in those strategies?
We do. We partner pretty much continuously throughout each year with the water management districts, and for us in particular, that's Swanee River and St. Johns River, the Florida DEP, including the Florida Park Service, but also the Office of State Lands, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, nonprofit land trusts like Alachua Conservation Trust, the North Florida Land Trust, Putnam Land Conservancy, and others. And we communicate about the priorities that each of us is working on and try and look at ways those priorities can get benefit from each other. One main focus throughout the state of Florida right now is something called the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And that's a statewide network of land that has been mapped out using what was originally known as the Florida Ecological Greenways Network project that was created and developed through the University of Florida and with other partners to identify the most critical habitat that can still be protected to connect wildlife habitat throughout the state, especially for animals with big home ranges, things like black bears, Florida panthers, but even bobcats, some species of snakes, certainly migratory birds. Those animals need more than an isolated island of habitat. They need broad corridors. The Florida Wildlife Corridor does come through Alachua County for one portion, and so we are definitely focused on trying to support that effort in our priorities as well.
I know every year there is an effort to either protect or expand the funding that comes from the state of Florida for land conservation. I've kind of lost track of what the current state is, but how is the state funding of land conservation these days?
Recently it's been very strong. Florida has a great history. About the time that the Alachua County Forever program was being fleshed out, the state programs in Florida were also very active. Preservation 2000, the Carl program, those programs really laid a foundation that we're continuing to build on. Most recently, the legislature has designated significant funding to the Florida Wildlife Corridor. They've designated funding to the Rural and Family Lands Program, which is a conservation easement program through the Florida Department of Agriculture. They've designated program for the Florida funding for the Florida Communities Trust Program and others. And these are really critical programs to get that bigger picture focus, and also to provide, in the case of our county or others, reimbursement funds or outright direct acquisition support to help us continue to purchase land and get the best value for that land.
So let's get into the nuts and bolts of how it works in Alachua County. How do you determine that this is a piece of land we want? If you're a landowner and you're interested in conservation, can you walk us step by step through the process and how land gets considered?
Sure, absolutely. So one starting point that's really important for people to understand is that our program is a willing seller program. We only work with landowners that are interested in working with us, or at minimum willing to work with us. We have some landowners who have a strong desire to conserve their property, and we have others who are just looking to sell their property but like the idea of conservation as an end game for that particular piece of property. Those folks, or any person, can nominate a piece of property on a simple one-page nomination form that we have.
Can they do that online, or
So
how does that work?
It's not we don't have a fillable form online, but we can email the form
Okay.
to folks, or it is available online to be downloaded, and then it can be either emailed back or turned in a hard copy.
Okay.
Even snail mail.
Okay. I've heard of that.
Right,
My mom used to use that.
That's right. So they fill out this one-page form. We receive it. The first thing we look for is, did the landowner nominate the property? If they did, we know that we've got a willing landowner.
Right.
If someone just nominated a piece of property that they really love, but they're not the landowner for, our next step is to make contact with the landowner. That's
so you don't waste a lot of time.
Yeah, and we wouldn't want a landowner to feel that we were trying to take their land from them if that wasn't what their goal was.
Right.
So we always want to make sure we have a willing landowner.
Okay.
Then once we have that willingness, our staff will do a field evaluation of the property to document its ecological value, to make sure that we understand the landowner's intent for the property. Sometimes they may subdivide it, or want to do something that's a modified sale of what they own.
Right.
We will write up an assessment, and we have a matrix that's a scoring matrix that we use on all properties to basically quantify the recreation value, the water resource protection value, the wildlife value, the cost for management, all of those pieces.
This is to try to make it an objective
process. So we're comparing apples to apples in some senses. Once we have that evaluation completed, our staff presents each property to our Citizen Advisory Board. That's the Land Conservation Board. They actually represent the voice of the citizens in approving properties to move forward in the process.
I see.
So those folks will vote. If they vote that the property is a priority, we then will present the property to the Board of County Commissioners at one of the regular meetings for consideration to add to what's called the active acquisition list. If they do that, that authorizes our staff to begin pursuing an acquisition on a property.
In a formal way, negotiating with the landowner at those
getting
things.
Appraisals, getting title work so we understand any issues with the title on the property, working towards a negotiated price, and if we're able to negotiate successfully with the landowner on a price, we will then enter into a contract, and only the county commission can enter into those contracts. So that's something that is presented at a commission meeting as well. If the commission chooses to exercise their option in a contract, we then enter due diligence. We're doing surveys, phase 1 environmental site assessments, really trying to pin down the final details of the property to then take to a real estate closing. So it's very similar to any real estate transaction, except it does take a little bit more time because it's a government process, and we want to make sure we're transparent and the public has the opportunity to see and understand what we're doing with their tax dollars for each acquisition.
those are some of my favorite county commission meetings, when you come in and all that work has been done and the board approves the sale, or excuse me, the purchase of the land conservation.
Those are my favorite too.
Yeah, I bet. And then of course we have the ribbon cuttings or the vine cuttings or whatever we do. And we've done a lot of those recently. But let's go to the next step. So we purchased the land. What kind of mobilization is there? What does your staff then do to begin tackling the question of how do you manage this? Is it going to be accessible to the public? What are the next steps?
Yeah, excellent question, because that's the long-term future part of the county's ownership of these lands. One of the first things that we do is determine who's going to manage the property, and usually that's worked through in the contract process also. Of our over 33,000 acres, approximately 4,500 are managed by partner agencies, either a water management district, Alachua Conservation Trust, or the Florida State Parks. Additionally, for some of those, if it's a conservation easement, the landowner continues to be the manager of the property because it's their property. So they'll continue the practices that they negotiated the right to do. For the ones that come to the county for management, our staff, our land conservation staff, will begin detailed assessments of the property, more detailed than we were able to do in the acquisition phase, to really understand the key resources, the potential for public recreation, to see if there are any legacy issues that need to be cleaned up. Sometimes there's legacy solid waste in some areas that we'll have to remove. Quite frequently, we're looking at what is a strategy to manage non-native invasive plants on the property, and then also what's a strategy to restore the natural role of fire on the property. And those usually require some heavy initial lifting by our staff, but then eventually we can get those sites into a maintenance condition. And that's about when we usually try and open a site to public recreation as well.
Are there ever sites that are just so environmentally sensitive that we don't open them to the public?
Yeah, there are. Our goal is to open as many of them as we can because these are public lands. They're purchased with public dollars. However, we do have a small number of sites that don't actually front a public road. And that's a barrier, that's more of a legal barrier. If we don't have a public road touching the property, then we can't just open a site for free public access.
You don't want traffic in
down a private road in a neighborhood,
or
a public road in a neighborhood could be okay, but private road's not okay.
Right.
We also do have a handful of sites in the southwest portion of the county that are sandhill habitat. That's one of the most imperiled natural communities or habitats that we have remaining in the southeastern United States. Well less than 3% of its historic footprint still exists.
Are those kind of in a specific area of
They're
the county?
in the Watermelon Pond area.
Okay.
Yeah. And
that's a beautiful area.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And that's a network of different public land ownerships as well. That's where Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the Florida Forest Service with Goethe State Forest, and then Alachua County have a network of land that's all built together to create a larger footprint.
Some people are surprised when they learn that there is hunting allowed on certain properties, and I assume that's done very strategically and for a very good reason. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Hunting is a public use of public lands, not just in Florida, but elsewhere as well. For us in Alachua County, we have hunting opportunities on different properties that are provided in different ways. One way is that we have 6 properties that we have a kind of like a hunting lease. It's a hunting contract with individuals who exchange caretaking work on the property for the right to do limited hunting on the property. So we have that, and those opportunities are advertised publicly for any citizen to submit proposals for when they're available.
And I assume this is, predators have been reduced in numbers and just to keep the balance of the ecosystem, that hunting is necessary?
Yes, with the expansion of human presence across the landscape, we have altered the dynamics of some of those predator-prey balances. That's an excellent point. We also,
that's okay.
Yeah, we also have one property that's part of one of the Fish and Wildlife WMAs, and that is actually at Watermelon Pond. So that has open public hunting. And additionally, we partner with the National Wild Turkey Federation to provide hunting through their women and youth hunts. And the lands that we have that are managed by St. John's Water Management District are opened for hunting through their WMA relationships.
The time is going by really quickly. There's so much I want to talk to you about, but tell me, what are some of your favorite acquisitions that we've made, and what are the coolest plants and wildlife species that you get excited about?
Yeah, great. My favorite acquisition is always the acquisition we've just made. So
that's a good answer.
Yeah, that answer changes constantly. So right now that would be at Lochloosa Slough. The Colasante property is our most recent acquisition. But we have 2 additional acquisitions we're pursuing right now that will be my next favorites. Additionally, I really enjoy hiking, as you mentioned earlier. So I like the preserves that have longer trails and trails with interesting topography. Mm-hmm. So for us, Mill Creek Preserve, Turkey Creek Preserve, and then Bar Hammock Preserve, which again is one of our 6,000-acre preserves. Yeah. And speaking of partnerships, that's a preserve that we bought 6,000 acres and spent less than 15% of the purchase price. It was almost entirely funded through grants and donations from the landowner, but has over 13 miles of trails in one entrance and another 6 in another.
What is your favorite flora and fauna that we've preserved?
I really love carnivorous plants. They're just super fascinating, and they often occur in fire-maintained ecosystems. And I've spent a lot of my career working with fire in Florida's ecosystems. Right. So I really appreciate finding those. And because those plants often rely on fire, many of them are imperiled. Right. So I'm happy to see pitcher plants, blue-flowered butterwort, spoonleaf sundew. Those are both imperiled carnivorous plants. Mm-hmm. Additionally, one of our staff just recently found an endangered ground orchid on Bar Hammock Preserve that is only reported from one other area in Florida. And this is just a plant that's there that we didn't know was there.
I've only got time, and it has to be really quick. How long did it take you to hike the Appalachian Trail, and how long did it take you to hike the Pacific Crest Trail?
Each one took about 5 months. So
5 months.
Yes, I had to resign from my career to do the Appalachian Trail, and I was graciously given leave to do the Pacific Crest Trail.
Well, Andi, thank you so much. I could stay with you another hour, but I so appreciate what you do for the county and for all of us, and thanks for coming.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.